Avoiding Manels. Male, pale and stale. What's the issue? Oh my goodness. Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. How's everyone doing this week? This week I'm going to talk about Manels. Who knows what Manels are? Well, I'm about to tell you. So recently I went to an event specifically targeted at avoiding Manels. So basically Manels are male panels. So I'm sure we've all been to conferences where the speakers are just all men. Like there's been so many conferences on like even things like women's health, for example, or like childcare, or so many different things which could be typically considered women's areas, you know, like our health, I don't know. And they're just all men. And so it's actually a real problem. And basically it's a problem for so many reasons, and I'll kind of go into those more as the video goes on. But as I said, I went to an event recently specifically targeted at this, and it was by the Brussels Binder. So basically the Brussels Binder is this database of just women who are available to speak at conferences, at events, and it basically is trying to like avoid Manels. Like people kind of have no excuse like for Manels, because there are these databases where you can literally go on, you can choose, you know, what country you're in, what language you want them to speak in, what topic you want them to speak on, and there's so many. And so it was organized by them, and they put together this handy toolkit which I thought was so interesting. So I learned so much from this personally, so I was like, I'll make a video about it and hopefully other people can learn. So in this video I'm going to talk about some of the problems with Manels and why they're not great, and then I'm going to kind of go through it, and it's kind of divided into two, and it's like, you know, from the perspective of when you're the organizer of the event, what you can do to avoid a Manel, and then it goes from the perspective of if you are being asked to speak at an event. So whether you're a man or a woman or trans or anyone, this comes from the perspective of when you're the one who's asked to speak and what you can do to maybe help out and ensure gender balance, or, you know, whatever. And then at the back it has some handy replies for when people make excuses for not having gender balanced panels. So it's really interesting. So yeah, let's get right in. So first of all, what are the problems? I mean, it's just, oh, do I even need to say it? Oh, I mean, of course I do. Just from the very basic level, it's just women's voices not being heard. You know, as we all know, women have very different experiences than men. We have very different perspectives as a result of that on life and on everything. And so our voices need to be heard to be able to have a balanced discussion on something, and to be able to have a well-rounded viewpoint on something. And if you're organising a conference and you just have all usually straight white old men, male, pale and stale, for those of you who like the little joke, and like their viewpoints just aren't going to be that diverse, because they're just all really similar people from similar backgrounds with similar experiences. And so it's just when you don't have women on panels or speaking at events, our voices are not heard. And like typically, you know, events are and conferences are used to influence something. So influence policy making and influence, you know, lobbyists and influence people. And if we want to kind of make any real change, we need to have women's voices on these conferences, so that change can occur. So just on a very basic level, that's why it's an issue. And it's just, and as well, I mean, like, just in terms of financial wise, I mean, a lot of times people are paid to come speak at conferences, and if it's all men, then just all men are getting the money and women aren't. Like, there's so many reasons why this is an issue. And it's just, and just to go to an interesting conference, like, why would you want to go to a conference where it's just all like the same type of person talking about something? Like, that's just not going to be fun or interesting. So you know, it's just really important to have gender balanced panels, I personally think. So as I said, I'm gonna go through this toolkit, which is on their website as well, and I'll actually link that below as well, because it's fascinating. And like, Brussels Binder isn't the only type of initiative like this. There are so many databases online where it's specifically for women, or just databases in general where you're looking for a speaker. Like it's just, yeah, there's just kind of no excuse really not to have women speakers, but whatever. So yeah, let's get right into this portion of the video. So, handy tips for when you are organising the conference. So first of all, it should be just a conversation. Thankfully it is more and more, but it should be a conversation just in general. Okay, grand, I hope we're all in agreement that we're going to have a gender balanced panel here. I hope this is going to be in our decision making process or in the back of our heads when deciding who to speak. So just kind of establish that first of all, I think is just really important. And like, if anyone has a problem, I'm kind of like, what's the problem? Like, we haven't even began looking for speakers and you're already having a problem with just establishing that we should strive for gender balance. Like, what's the issue? And so some of the tips on this say, book speakers early, which is good to do anyway, but consider inviting more women than men. This basically leaves you with a bit more freedom. Like, if more women come back and say yes, or if every single woman you invite comes back and says no, and if it's, you know, early on, then you can say, oh crap, okay, we really need to start inviting a lot of women because they're all saying no for whatever reason, and we really need to, we can't leave this until the last minute and only have to go with men, you know. So yeah, it's a good tip. Invite early and invite lots and lots of women. Another tip here is to say to build the event around one female keynote speaker. And that could be good, you know. I think, like, for one, it might, if the event is, say, built around one female keynote speaker, it might encourage other women to come speak if they know that it's a welcoming place for women, and that if that the event organisers are conscious of this, and that it's going to, that she won't be the only woman there. And so yeah, I think it's kind of an interesting way to do it, and also just to give the woman the opportunity to be the keynote speaker and to you know, to show that we value women's voices and respect women's voices, and that would be just a really cool thing to do. Also, apparently, which I learned at the event, women are a lot more likely to, like, say, yeah, I can come to I can speak at the conference, and then actually pull out later. And this could be due to a variety of reasons. One, it could be due to imposter syndrome, simply not feeling like they are confident enough to do it, they don't know enough, they haven't prepared, and they simply might pull out because they're just worried or nervous. Also, as we all know, women are the primary caregivers still in our society, and they might have kids, something might come up, and they would be a lot more likely to have to take off work, which would be speaking at this conference, to go mind their kids than a man would be. So try and have a lot of female speakers lined up, just in case one or two pull out and then you're left with none then, and it's like, oh my god, what's happening? So yeah, all super interesting tips. They're just things that you wouldn't really think about, but I'm like, wow, okay. Again, just on a really simple note, use databases like the Brussels Binder. It's very easy. Literally, you just type in, like, find a female speaker, like, or just find speakers. Like, there's loads of them out there, and it's really easy, and like, there's kind of, again, no excuse to not really have any women at your panel. Another really interesting one is, a lot of times we want people to speak at panels who are in, like, high up positions. So we want CEOs, we want, you know, MEPs, we want, you know, prime ministers, and because of sexism and just the way the world has been, a lot of the people in the top positions are men. And so if you may not necessarily be, like, consciously sexist, but if you're going for just CEOs and people in really top positions, it's kind of a knock-on effect then that you're going to have a very male panel because the majority of people in those positions are male. So it's a tough one. So basically, like, I think we should just start rethinking who we want to come to panels. And like, a lot of time, as we all know, it's not necessarily the person in the top position that has all the knowledge on a topic. It's usually the people who are lower down but actually are working on it on a day-to-day basis. So we should really rethink, you know, inviting those people who then, as a knock-on effect, might be more likely to be women. Therefore, you have no problem. So yeah, interesting one, guys, interesting one. Then another really fascinating one is, if you're, say, doing an event on farming, let's just say, and you're having a problem finding a female speaker, Google, like, other farming events, like other farming conferences that have happened, like, all over the world, and find who they had to speak at them. And if you say, okay, they have a woman, she sounds great, like, if you find, invite her. Like, it's so simple, but it's so interesting. Literally just look at other conferences where they've spoken on this similar topic, and look at their speakers. If they have a woman, invite them. Like, and if they're good enough for your event and they fit your vibe, like, it's just, yeah, fascinating. Just literally Google other events and see who they've had to speak. Oh my goodness. Ah! Then another kind of just, not necessarily tip for when you're organising conferences, but just in general, companies, it would be a good idea to track your previous events. So as you do events, like, keep track of how many male speakers you have, how many female speakers you have. Say if you happen to have one conference where it's all, you know, male speakers, you can kind of, you know, write it off, say, oh well, that's just this conference, you know. But if you're constantly tracking them and you notice a real pattern, then it's very easy to say, look, we actually have a problem, we just have all male speakers the whole time. So that is an excellent tip as well, guys. And then maybe publish the information, like, for everyone to see, to kind of name and shame yourself basically, and kind of hold yourself accountable and be like, okay, this is embarrassing, we need to work better. So yeah, fascinating, guys. Now let's move on to if you yourself are invited to the conference, what can you do? So when you're invited to a conference, you should ask the organisers who the other speakers are, which is kind of normal anyway, but ask who they are, and then you'll see, like, if they have a gender balanced panel, excellent, great, you're like, stunning, sorted. And if they don't, be like, well, is this an issue? Like, put pressure on organisations and hold them accountable and be like, this is, and like, you know. And then a lot of the times you hear more nowadays about like pledges, like people taking pledges, men basically, to not speak at panels if they're all men. So they actually just won't come. And so if a conference really wants you to come speak, they will literally be forced to find a female speaker, which wouldn't be the worst thing in the entire world. And then they can have you speak. But it's a way of being an ally and helping women out and showing that you value their women's voices and that other places should too. And just naming and shaming people. Like, people hate to be embarrassed, so make them be embarrassed. And as well, if they're struggling and if you're forming an organisation, you can suggest women from your organisation that will speak on this and say, well, you know, like, how are you struggling to find a lot of women? There's so many women here that are excellent and that could speak on this. Like, here is a list. So help out and feel free to do that. And yeah, it's just an amazing way to yeah, just be an ally and just to, yeah, make women's voices heard. And then, you know, to wrap up, people will make excuses. And basically, I think we should all be calling them out. So the back of this has kind of some, like, just things people say. You know, they'll say like, oh, you know, I tried, but there was no women available. It's like, ask yourself as well, why did no women want to come to your event? Maybe it's not welcoming there. Like, maybe it's just a lot of men. Like, that's not very welcoming. Or like, I wouldn't be comfortable going to that. Or when people make the excuse that their moderators are women. So like, if the person, you say if it's a panel, you know, and you have the person who's like kind of introduces all the speakers and then kind of maybe wraps up what they say and pushes on to the next person, they're like, oh, well, our moderators are female. But it's like, the moderator isn't going to have a chance to actually say her own viewpoint on stuff, and she's not going to be seen as an expert on something. They're really facilitators of the conversation, but they're not in the conversation. So that's also not good enough as well. So look out for that. Or if they say, which is one that I didn't really know people actually said until I read this, but when people say they were not on the speaker list, like they weren't speaking, but there was a load of women in the audience. Like, no, that's just not the same thing at all. Like, how would you think that's the same thing at all? So this one, they have a good answer. It's present is not the same as presenting, which is excellent. Now we will end on that note. Thank you for watching this week's video. I hope you learned something. As I said, I will leave the link to Brussels Binder and maybe some other organisations as well that do this, that help you find speakers. And yeah, it's just something to keep in mind, and just, yeah, happy conferencing, everybody. Bye.